Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our community capital improvement plan work session of June 14th, Tuesday. This is Chair Katie Crystal speaking, joined in person by my colleagues Libby Garvey, Matt DeFerenti, Takis Karantonis, and I believe we are joined virtually by Christian Dorsey, our Vice Chair. Is that correct, Mr. Dorsey?
Yes, it is. Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. He is joining us remotely from Columbus, Ohio, where he is attending the National Association of Regional Councils annual conference. Thanks for dialing in. We are here convening to discuss three elements of the CIP: the facilities and energy efficiency sections, parks and recreation plans, and the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, entity formerly known as Neighborhood Conservation. We're really excited about the new name and the presentation. And I would like to remind everybody who might be following along, you can see the presentations available on the county website. If you go to arlingtonva.us and search Capital Improvement Program, Capital Improvement Plan. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the county manager to get us started on the first of the presentations.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. As you noted, we have 4 areas to go through today. The first one covers a large number of county facilities. George May is here, and we're going to kick that off. Turn it over to Mr. May. George?
Thank you, Mark. I am George May, representing our DES facilities team. And our request today will cover 5 areas that are aligned with the manager's priorities that he presented to the board in May. Firstly, we have 2 racial equity requests: create opportunities for expanded services in underserved areas of Southwest Arlington. Next, we are asking to continue our investments in our 92 owned county buildings. We'll maintain our state of good repair. We're also addressing emerging priorities by leveraging underused or vacant spaces while recognizing the value of a space reserve to address additional operational needs as they develop, including our need for swing space. We're also improving our energy performance with selection of high-efficiency equipment that's based on joint work between our facilities maintenance and design and construction teams and the air team to identify energy and carbon use reduction opportunities. And finally, we are requesting planning funds to better balance our long-term needs with underdeveloped land and buildings. And next, please. In terms of achieving racial equity, our 2 requests are to serve underserved areas in Southwest Arlington. At 5519 Columbia Pike, we'd like to exercise our land purchase option in fiscal 24 for a future fire station site that will serve the growing population at the west end of the pike and reduce dependence on Fairfax Fire Department's mutual aid. Secondly, we're asking for funding to remove the abandoned hospital building at the Carlin Springs site, which will create the opportunity for future public and civic uses in that neighborhood. Next. This CIP request, combined with our previous approved PAYGO funding, allows us to continue improvements across our 92 building inventory. These include additional investments across our portfolio we'll be described in both our facilities and our maintenance presentations. Additionally, removal of the 139,000 square foot of unusable Virginia Hospital building at Carlin Springs, and implementing our requested programs and now empty floors in the 2020 14th Street building will reduce the vacant space shown at the bottom of this slide by about 70%. Next. Some of the significant project deliveries since our last reporting to you include completion of third floor renovations in the Madison Center and construction completion and start of fire department services in both Fire Station 10 in Roslyn and the temporary Fire Station 8 on Langston Boulevard. Projects underway with our previous commitments include completing the separation of the adjacent doctor's office building from the Virginia Hospital building at the Carlin Springs site, replacements at Fire Station 8 and the DHS group home at 1212 South Irving. The new group home will be a net zero building with a geothermal field. Later this summer, we will complete the initial step in preparing the Quincy 1 building for fire and police storage and operating use. We'll also be expanding the capacity of the Arlington Child Care Center program, which is planned to open in the fall of '23. Our 10-year CIP request is sorted by program and funding source as we show on this slide. Our specific programs in FD&C, facilities management, and air programs will follow. The majority of our 10-year request supports ongoing facility investments. The 5% for air programs includes support for both heating systems electrification and energy reduction improvements that are embedded in the FD&C and FMB programs, and AIR's initiatives in further reducing our carbon footprint, as they will describe shortly. The previous slide detailed the funding for our 10-year CIP, of which bond funding makes up the majority. This slide shows the specific facilities requests will be funded with the requested November 22 bond referendum, which for the most part covers our needs in fiscal 23 and 24. We will go into more detail on each of these projects in the coming slides. The distribution across the county for our major facilities program requests are shown here. They will be described in further detail by Michelle Condon for FD&C, Rami Natour for facilities management, and Demetra McBride for our energy improvement projects. Michelle?
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Congdon for Facilities Design and Construction. This year's bond request contains 11 defined entries, half build on the previous year's authorizations, and are sequential projects that complement completed or ongoing work. This chart depicts a prioritized overview of requests by fiscal year, highlighting bond premium, and pay-go for the 10 years at approximately $190 million. On the next few slides, I will detail the bond requests. Our highest priority is Carlin Springs, the Old Virginia Hospital Center building. This funding will provide for the demolition of the large non-functional empty building that creates an attractive nuisance and poses certain risks to the community. After the building removal, the site will have greater flexibility for both interim and long-term uses, and in FY 2025, preliminary funding is reserved for a site planning study. The magnitude of costs on this phase is due to the extensive footprint of the facility, regulatory requirements to remove widespread mold and asbestos before demolition for worker safety, and stormwater compliance requirements. 3700 South 4 Mile Run project includes requests for infrastructure improvements to replace windows, solar-ready roof replacement, and a pilot for electric boilers. This work will prepare the building to be ready to receive cultural and arts programs, which is the first step in the process in order to be ready to implement recommendations for programs to move to this facility in the future. As development growth continues in Arlington, the coverage needs of the fire department have increased to provide service in underserved areas such as the west end of Columbia Pike. The county has an option to purchase the land at 5519 Columbia Pike, where a test fit has determined its viable use for a new west end fire station that meets the fire department's program and response needs. Followed by land acquisition in FY 23, design and construction will begin in FY 24 through 26. Continuing to support our expanding fire department needs in the FY 22-23 CIP, it was approved for the design and construction to relocate the fire marshal and fire prevention office from 1020 Hudson Street to the Thomas Building. Our FY 24 and 25 requested funding is to consolidate the remaining fire administrative offices from both Bosman to the 6th floor in the Thomas Building to increase both space and staff efficiencies. In addition, a new situational awareness center will be established to share, monitor, filter, and disseminate key information during a critical public safety event or special event. A substantial portion of the new funding is to address the immediate infrastructure issues that facilities management has been experiencing since acquiring the building in November of 2012. Continued improvements as prioritized in the Courts Police 2018 study are planned to continue with the design of both the 4th floor JDR space and the 12th floor judges' chambers, with construction to start on the courtroom prototype in early summer of 22. The immediate funding in FY 23 will address the shortfall in construction funds to complete the JDR area, followed by subsequent upgrades each year for the courtroom upgrades till they're completed, which integrate with the backbone extension. Future out years will address the remaining priorities identified in the Courts Police study, including upgrading the remaining courtrooms, They're estimated about 2 per year in this scenario, and a fully converged backbone, single common low voltage pathway systems, upgraded horizontal cabling infrastructure to user suites, and also creating a central holding area, possible redesign options for level 1 of the courthouse entry and security screening, police area improvements, and various other renovations. Our next entry is comprised of various projects at the Quincy site that includes site planning for operational uses and general maintenance items such as HVAC, roof, and fire alarm system replacements. In the out years, 1425 North Quincy Street is a continuation of funding to complement the relocation of fire and police apparatus and emergency vehicles that was completed this spring. This project includes the fit-out of remaining space located in the building for fire logistics located at the old Fire 5 facility. Proceeding with this next step will create future opportunities for redevelopment of the Aurora Hills site. Building on the Trade Center optimization plan completed in 2020 and FY 2023, as part of our PAGO request, FD&C was funded to look at the APS structured and electric bus parking and best uses for proposed vacated areas for non-essential trade operations recommended in the Phase 1 study. This request is a placeholder that will implement the findings of the FIT study in a phased manner. Our next project is continued funding for the Ballston Public Garage to expand the condition assessment for flooding to include the building facade to be followed by the recommended repairs. Columbia Pike Library was recently renovated in collaboration with Arlington Public Schools from a 2-story library to a reduced 1-story. Differing from previous CIPs, this request is to redevelop the recently purchased parcel at 3108 Columbia Pike as a potential mixed-use partnership to relocate the library in anticipation of APS's growth in the next few years. Lastly, our bond requests for planning studies complement our PAGO requests and will facilitate larger-scale planning for 26 and Old Dominion and the county's 2 nature centers in the latter part of the CIP out years.
Good afternoon, I'm Rami.
Could we bother you, Mr. Natur, to turn on that microphone so you get that? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Yes. All right, good afternoon, I'm Rami Natur from Facility Management Bureau. With a combination of PAGO, Go Bond, and Bond Premium funding this year, these are the facility management projects. I will review our top priority projects in the following slides. Next, please. The first grouping is our CSI and fire station projects, including upgrading the fire station IT closets due to security concerns. We will be adding 1 new HVAC unit at the fire station 1 and 8 cameras and card readers in supporting of standardization of the county fire station's IT closets. Another is replacing a 1 HVAC unit at the Courthouse Plaza, the 911 radio site, which is failing. Our fire station projects include Fire Station 1 and 9, replacing the bay floor and trench drain due to floor stress cracking and trench drain failure. Fire Station 5, we will be replacing the existing green roof that is 15 years old and has frequent leaks and repairs. The new green roof will have a higher R value and provide better energy efficiency to the building and reduce future utility expenses. Fire Training Academy, facade repairs, exterior facades are in need of repairs due to water infiltrations from cracks. Next slide, please. Moving on to phase 2 of the detention facility VAV replacements of the existing 27-year-old pneumatic VAV boxes with digital controls and more energy efficiency equipment. The existing VAVs are failing and are causing the sheriff to relocate inmates to different cells on hot or cold days. The Sullivan House project will upgrade the fire system to meet ADA requirements, repair cracks on the exterior facade, replace existing window-type HVAC units, address sagging floors, and refresh the kitchen and bathrooms. Lastly, at Madison Community Center, the HVAC and roof will be replaced, including asbestos abatement. The existing roof is 37-year-old and has reached the end of its useful life. Similar to Fire Station 5, the new roof will have a higher R value, increase energy efficiency, and reduce the future utility expenses. In addition, we will be replacing the existing HVAC units that are failing and install new building automation to control these units.
Thank you, Rami. For the record, I'm Demetri McBride, Bureau Chief for the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management, which includes the AIR team. You will likely recognize this slide from the manager's presentation summarizing how the proposed CIP reflects the county's all-of-government approach to achieving climate, energy, and resiliency goals. The dashboard is not exhaustive, but demonstrates cross-departmental commitments in built and green infrastructure, compliance and environmental quality, the increased transition to public transportation, zero to low emissions means of moving people, goods, and services, and construction in county buildings. The county actively pursues climate and resiliency principles and leadership, not only through CIP projects and programs, but also in how we procure design consultants and contractors. Next, please. These principles are more clearly recognized in this snapshot from the facility CIP. Michelle and Rami just reviewed each of these projects with you, but this slide more clearly demonstrates embedded environmental co-benefits, such as electric replacements of end-of-life equipment, REACH code standards, bless you, and upgrades to building envelopes, energy performance options, including renewables, and even the integration of biophilia and contemporary technology and the Fire Station 5 green roof. In addition to energy performance standards deployed directly by FMB and FDC, the AIR team implements government sector actions under the Community Energy Plan in collaboration with facilities and others, with facilities briefly defined in 6 programs on the next 2 slides. Next, please. Here we propose investments to address on-site solar capacity of government sites and resulting installations, noting, of course, that unprecedented market, trade, production, distribution, and price disruptions in the solar sector may affect the timing of execution. This near-term ambiguity is a global challenge for solar implementers. Resiliency planning and modeling will also develop over the CIP schedule and inform future projects, with the goal to ensure energy supply and delivery of core operations and services during periods of inoperability of the grid or power interruption. Next, please. The CIP also addresses on-site renewable energy and storage, resiliency systems, publicly accessible EV charging hubs on government sites, increased electrification of county facilities, and development of tools to inform decarbonization and county facility upgrades. Shown here, AIR also supports FMB in the siting and installation of an EV charging network matched to the county's own fleet. Taken together, these investments respond to core goals under multiple CEP sectors, including renewable energy, government leadership, buildings, transportation, and resilience. Beyond facilities, AIR also works with CPHD and DHS to promote energy equity and sustainability and affordable housing and group housing, consistent with the board's express addition of an equity lens to the 2019 Community Energy Plan. Through the CIP, development of decarbonization tools, ongoing training in best practices, and strategic procurement, the partnership between AIR and facilities is actively collaborative and dynamic, both operationally and in the development of this proposed facility CIP. I will now return the presentation to George May for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Demetri. Thank you, Michelle and Rami. In terms of our wrap-up, I would first like to say our request does align with the manager's priorities, and notably our proposed increase in services focused on underserved communities, and in addition, maintaining what we have and addressing emerging needs such as the Situational Awareness Center. Our planning studies will address both maintaining operational flexibility and swing space, as well as obtaining community feedback for services on underdeveloped land and facilities. Further combining programs or removing unusable buildings creates planning opportunities. As you heard from Demetri, in the energy area, all of the facilities groups are collaborating and seeking opportunities for energy reduction and how best means to electrify end-of-life gas heating systems. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't say we have some challenges. And they come in several areas. First, in delivering our programs within current budgets and timelines will be a challenge. We see a lot of pricing volatility and unexpected increases combined with supply chain uncertainties. These all represent ongoing concerns to our delivery commitments. As an example, in April, we learned that a major chiller manufacturer was increasing prices for previously committed and signed orders. And it was an arbitrary move on their part, but it resulted in a 10% or $57,000 price increase for the replacement chiller you heard Rami describe going into the detention center. Additionally, the lead times are really increased dramatically. Before the pandemic, the lead time for a chiller was 10 to 16 weeks. Now it's 35 to 40 weeks. And the same thing is occurring in even the more mundane areas of office furnishings. We used to be able to get furnishings in 6 weeks from request. It's now 10 to 12 weeks. And additionally, as we're all aware, AIR is still seeking some greater certainty on how we're going to go to the solar market to deliver our plans for on-site renewable energy. I wish I could finish on a happier note, but that's our summary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. May. And it is our intent, Mr. Manager, right, to take a break there before moving into our next area is great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate presentations from across the teams. We'll have some time now for questions. Before we do that, I want to note we are joined by the chair of our C2E2 Commission, which I understand is working on a letter for us. Did you want to make remarks, Chair McIntyre? You are welcome to, but under no obligation.
No, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Mine is a little off, but.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm Joan McIntyre, Chair of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission, just for the record. But just, we are still looking at it, and we, because of the timing, it's going to be fairly late in the month before we have our formal letter. But just based on what we have said in the past and looking through these, first, appreciate the greater emphasis on environment throughout, in the CIP. I think that's, moving in the direction that we would like to see and would like to see more. I think our biggest concern, particularly on facilities, remains the issue of electrification in buildings. It's been mentioned, issues that there are going to be some pilots, but I think, we're getting to the point that the county probably should be making a commitment to electrify all our buildings and kind of set a timeline as equipment has to be replaced. There are a number of HVAC systems being replaced in the CIP, so just understanding which ones are actually using fossil gas and making the best opportunity to actually replace those at this point. Otherwise, we are locked in for another 15 to 20 years as we wait for those systems to age out. So that would be one area. The other area that we brought up in last year's CIP letter was the transparency issue. And I think there's still a lot of room for some additional transparency in the overall CIP. And I think, frankly, the county is actually missing an opportunity to highlight some of the progress that they're making and what they're looking for. For example, the transition of the ART bus system as well as the fleet system and what that means in terms of our carbon emission goals. Small for the county, but pretty big for the county government. The same with the solar panels, the solar on the rooftops. Now, in many of these cases, some of these will be exploratory, and any estimates of what the gains are going to be, has to be understood that they are estimates. But I think it's worth pointing out that, what we're gaining for these. And again, we keep coming back to the electrification and moving away from fossil gas. So, being more explicit on that. I would say even for the stormwater management, and I know you haven't gotten to that, but since I have the floor, I'll kind of continue on that. But, opportunities to, we're spending a lot of money on it. It's very important. Just, and it's not, can't be a lot of extra work because it's got to be built into the project planning, but just some sense of what are we getting out of that money in terms of reduced stormwater runoff, flood protection, improved water qualities, those issues. I mean, those are issues that have to be part of the contracting process. So again, where the exact plans are not necessarily in place, that they should have a good opportunity to know exactly what we're trying to get out of that. That's just a little bit of transparency of saying what's the so what on what we're expending. And even on the electrification and the energy performance, again, is, how much we're saving. I think there was one table in the CIP that kind of referenced some savings in money, some savings due to energy performance, but again, highlighting those issues to know, getting what we're getting out of our spending is useful. I mean, I worked in the intelligence community as an analyst, and one of the things we got pounded into, it was the so what. You could talk about what was happening, but from the perspective of the policymakers, it was the so what. And that would be the same thing. And again, most of these things should be clear as they're doing the planning, because they're part of the contracting process. If you don't know what your end goal is, it's hard to actually contribute or to put forward what you want. And then the final thing I would actually note is the natural resources plan is starting to move in the direction of treating that as as an asset for the county, and putting money in that for reforestation and invasive removals, and that is that I think we're excited, and I know the other commissions are excited about putting that into the CIP, and we look forward to seeing those projects as they develop.
Excellent. Thank you, and a great note to end on, since that will bridge us to our next area as well. I know we'll be talking about Parks and Recreation staff. Thank you so much, Ms. McIntyre. We appreciate it, and very aware of the challenge for our commissions of having to react relatively quickly. So thank you for bringing forward that lens of previous discussed items on the part of the commission. All right, we'll begin with a round of questions. I think I see Mr. DeFranti first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you help me understand the Situational Awareness Center? I know that Ms. Garvey might support it, but I don't know exactly what it is just yet. I mean, I'm looking here. I looked a little bit and I don't know who the question is best directed to. And I just saw Mr. Schwartz's look, so we have a plan now.
I think Chief Pavlis is coming. I could tell you what I think it is, but.
Yeah, we have, how does it relate to the, we steered clear of the Emergency Communications Center physically, I think. And how does this relate to the ECC, given the vast changes that have happened? Maybe you could speak a little to it. I can also sure follow up with Dr. Miller if he's appropriate. But
He should be coming online in just a moment.
Okay.
I think the Situational Awareness Center will consolidate a lot of the public safety information flows, namely the watch desk from the ECC may be embedded in the Situational Awareness Center. It also serves to bring in a lot of the information and data streams from special events that we anticipate will be participating in a lot more in this fall, and bring a lot of departments in the county in one room, in one setting, able to manage and coordinate either live emergency incidents or extended events.
got it. I think that helps me, but it would be the lead staff of fire ECC in a specific, with respect to a specific event, and maybe also some tabletops. Is that kind of?
Correct. More of a flexible space to bring in as needed, and also to scale up. So any staffs from Department of Environmental Services, Public Safety, anyone who would be involved in coordinating county operations from an event, or if it was an emergency, quickly bringing in those response agencies to manage. It would also be a good place to interface with county executive leadership too, to bring them a little closer to the information and decision-making for these events.
Great, that helps. And I don't know if maybe colleagues remember, or Mr. Schwartz or DMF, this seems like a fraction of the ECC cost. Is that correct?
Yes, so we have an emergency operations center over in Court Square West, which we have not actually fully activated in the physical sense, even over the last 2 years. We've been doing a lot of that virtually. What we're talking about here is, this isn't meant to replicate that. It would be in let's see, the best example I can come up with is if there were a situation in the county that was an immediate threat, we would be able to gather the right people there, tap into all our assets and coordinate it electronically. I don't know, there's multiple databases. Right now we have traffic cameras in one place that we're looking at. We're monitoring our sewer and water in one place. Our watch desk is in another place. This isn't meant to consolidate them in one physical location to bring all the virtual assets together. My preference would be that it would actually be not all that busy 99% of the time.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Ms. Garvey, did you have follow-up on that?
I did, yeah. And I'm assuming it would also help coordinate regionally, maybe, because sometimes we have events and something's happened across the river, or something's happening in Fairfax coming here, so that also will help coordinate with the regional.
Yes, ma'am, from other operation centers within the 2 states and the district, and also combining the information flows from the intelligence fusion centers. It consolidates everything to the decision makers.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a great hub.
Yeah.
And if I could just mention, I think we were fortunate, we just learned, I think last week, that Senator Kaine was able to get some funding for this in the markup on the Senate side in the appropriations process. So I'm never going to say it's a done deal, but we're optimistic, and I think it recognizes the need. We are one of the few major urban jurisdictions that doesn't have a facility like this, that we're able to we have a watch desk, which I don't want to overstate it, but it's literally a desk with one person at, and this is meant to create more physical space with more monitors and that kind of thing. It's a relatively, I don't want to say cheap, but we're making a big deal out of it, but it's a $2 to $3 million investment.
Thanks. And Mr. Dorsey, I noted a hand up. Did you want to weigh in on this or different topic?
It's a different question, so please continue with the questions in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any more to be said about that emergency situational awareness facility? All right.
Super quick. Does that mean that we would get savings on the 2.8 if Senator Kaine got this in the earmark?
It would mean that the number in here would end up being lower.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Otherwise known as savings.
Yeah.
Which is a equivalent to savings, right?
Yes. Excellent. On the same topic?
No, not on the same.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Chief Pavlitz. All right, Mr. Dorsey, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess this question is for Mr. Schwartz, even though it's a question arising from Mr. May's presentation. The pricing volatility that we're experiencing here, but we'll also experience across all of the functional program areas, do we have a strategy to assess and deal with this? And so what I'm looking for is whether or not we're analyzing whether or not the pricing increases and volatility are sort of real and based on real factors which we expect will persist, or we view them as transitory, and if so, whether we're employing different approaches like negotiating with suppliers, delaying purchases, maybe looking for regional cooperation through cooperative purchasing to address it. I'm looking for a little sense of how we're analytically assessing the circumstances that we're experiencing.
So the answer to your question actually is embedded in your question. All of those strategies are legitimate approaches. I know you and I have talked about regional approaches, and those take a long time to build collaboration. We're working on that for smaller size purchases through COG and Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Also, I may let George or other people comment on this, which is what we're laying out here is a 10-year plan, and there are a few things that we're actually right now in the queue to actually go ahead and do the contracting on, and George mentioned a few of them. But many of these, we have been fairly cautious about building in price escalators because we don't know when we get a year or 2 or 3 down the road whether those prices that we're estimating right now will actually increase. I'm not going to tell you I think inflation is transitory, but at this point, it would be, I think it would be unfortunate if we built in a 10 or 15% increase in the costs in the plan, assuming that those would actually be realized. So all those strategies, and I will let George or Rami and Michelle, who have to actually negotiate and maybe even bring up examples of what's going on in our building right now, where you have a lot of work going on, and you just sort of stare at it and you say, it's coming along, when's it going to open? and the furniture can't show up for 3 or 4 months, as you mentioned. But if you have specific examples,
So yes, we did.
you have to shout and put that on.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. So yeah, we did the two approaches. I'll give you one example. Fire Station 6, we got a proposal about a year and a half to do all 10 doors of the fire station bifolds. The estimated cost for the doors were $450,000 to replace all 10. So we waited until the CIP kicked for Falls Church, which was last July, and we got the funding, and we told Falls Church we're ready. When we went back to the contractor, the price went up to $640. So we didn't have funds to do this. So the contractor told us, just wait until December, prices will go down. We waited till December. Right now, we're at $980,000. So that's the approach we did, the first approach for waiting. The other approach is we did go and negotiate with Trane on the chillers. We asked them, why did the price go up 18%? I mean, we told you they said the manufacturer, Trane, said they don't care if they sell us or they don't. This is the price, you either take it or leave it. And that's the approach a lot of the contractors are doing. Not contractors, manufacturers. And their contractors are, stuck with this. So that's a problem we're facing right now. And a lot of it is because they don't want to show negative numbers on their books. That's what I was told.
Understood. But it pleases me to hear that where we can wait for these dramatic shifts, which we suspect are not necessarily based on permanent inflationary factors, that we're taking a more cautious approach. So thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate the line of questioning. And that really sobering but elucidating example. Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. A question on libraries. Looking at the description, which I know Ms. Diane Kresh is not here, but when we did a tour, one of the things that sort of jumped out is that we have a vault to keep a lot of supplies in and memorabilia and ephemera, I think you call it, but it's not fireproof. Do you know if some of this CIP funding is to make some kind of fireproof storage area?
There was funding in our PAYGO request in order to upgrade some things at Central Library, but it did not include upgrading that area for the archives to fireproof.
Okay, thank you.
And I know you and I have talked about this, and not only you and I and many of the people in this room history buffs, but it's only as good as we can to make sure we safeguard those materials. We have an opportunity as we go ahead and plan the Columbia Pike Library and also make further investments to see if we can build in something that's more permanent into that. And so we're absolutely keeping that in mind as part of, but again, I don't want you to say that's going to be a solution that is in this year or next year. It's 5 or 6 years out. So we're doing a lot of finger crossing between now and then.
Yeah, I just wanted to plant a pin and make sure we're at least thinking about it. Thank you.
Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. I have a question on the Trade Center. So I try to understand. I understand that we are implementing the optimization plan and the findings of the optimization plan. But I have the impression that it's a little bit, it is slow. So it's 2 million now, 2 million in 2 years, and 3.5 million further in the out years of the CIP. So what is the plan for the Trade Center? I realize this is a place where we have so many functions that are, in need of optimization, and we have had a lot of conversations here of how do we, optimize the delivery of services from that center. So what's behind the CIP appropriation here?
So for the Trade Center, what we're looking at is doing the second follow-on study to the first study for the phase 1. Mm-hmm. And in that study, we're going to look at, viable options for moving things off the Trade Center. As we, compile all these, planning studies for, 26 and Old Dominion and any other properties we own that are not fully, used. So we'll be looking at that and where we can put those things. So right now, we just have some minimal money in there as placeholders until we can really determine what is going to go where and exactly how much that will cost for those relocations. And then, you know, what we're going to backfill at the trade center. So if something leaves the trade center, what can we do to better organize the space at the trade center? So until we do some of these things with the EV charging and look at bus parking, we really don't know exactly where things are going to go. And that's why it's important to also do the 26 and Old Dominion studies and, you know, all those larger site planning studies. Because right now we have to, you know, locate those things.
Mr. Carantonis, this is just something I know that Greg's probably going to shoot a dart in the back of my head, so I'm not going to look in that direction. But this is something that's been enormously frustrating to me. And Michelle Congdon just brought it up, which is that 4 years ago, Arlington Public Schools came to us and said, we don't have enough room to park our school buses. And if you go down to the Trade Center, they're pretty much all over the place. I don't mean that in a bad way. They're just everywhere. So now, as we were working on that and trying to come up with solutions in the interim, and for good reason, we're now facing the school bus fleet should eventually be replaced with electric school buses. And in order to do that, we're going to have to add an enormous amount of infrastructure. I'm just going to put it on the table. This is a question about whether we want to have all our school buses in one place or whether we want to have them distributed in the county. Is something that we haven't really addressed head on in many years. And so we have a lot of work we want to do down at the Trade Center, a lot of moving pieces. We have to settle them one at a time. I'll give you another example, the impound lot. There's an impound lot, which I view as, I don't know if you ever watched Dragnet, you know, Sergeant Friday, whatever. It's a 1940s kind of invention, which is maybe there's a different way to use that space and impound cars in conjunction with Alexandria or a regional solution. We have to just start piece by piece moving away from that. And you look at it, the thing is a sprawling one. It's like the people who wrote the community facility study must be having a heart attack. It's just, I'm not trying to densify incredibly, but it's all just very flat and laying out in one story. So we have to pick a piece and we have to work on it. We were going to work on the buses, but I think that's up in the air right now. That is the biggest and most intensive use of that property. We have to solve that and we have to partner with schools. In the interim, we're going to look at things like the impound lot. We also have other kinds of facilities there that we need to focus on. So we'll do some studies, but at the end of the day, unless we start doing one specific thing, it's going to look the same 4 years from now that it looks now. You're right, we haven't made any progress.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. A question of my own about the Lee Community Center. It's included into the facility condition assessments and planning studies. There's also a footnote within the CIP that we've got about an additional $250,000 in, I believe, this bond referendum in fiscal 2024 for planning. This may be a question for follow-up from either CPHG and or AED, but from the facilities perspective, what do you all foresee? This is relatively near term. Is that just about assessing the sort of remaining life of the Lee Community Center, about which I think we're not that optimistic, or is it about planning for the future of it? I know a lot of that is to be informed by Plan Langston Boulevard, as well as sort of the future provision of cultural affairs resources. But from where you sit, what is encompassed within that work?
Okay, well, I think it comes in two flavors. As you heard from Michelle, part of the work we're doing in 3700 building is to prepare a space in the event there needs to be a relocation. Okay. So, and as you're probably also aware, the programs at Lee Community Center, to coin a phrase, are running on borrowed time.
Right.
Because the air handlers are old and we have no means to repair or replace them. So the second part of your question, I believe, is embedded in the Langston plan on looking at options at the site, most of which is, when I read the current version of the study, look at some form of replacing the building.
Okay, so there's both a use determination for the future of the site to be done, and then also kind of a siting process for the current uses at 4700.
That 3700, we're preparing for what may be the eventual relocation.
Okay,
But we don't have a timeline, obviously.
thank you. All right, another round of questions. Mr. DeFranti.
I guess this set of questions is kind of on the environmental, some of the questions related to energy efficiency and renewables. The Madison Center, we're not going to do solar ready there. Is that right? And I just sort of, 3,700, I think we're going to make it solar ready, but not purchase the solar panels.
Yeah.
Is this about not knowing third-party purchase agreement, or we have to spend it and do it ourselves? Kind of want to understand a little bit the area.
All right. So basically, we still don't know. So we don't know exactly how to make it solar ready. So I think when we have the agreement with the PPA, then we'll do that part. With Madison, it's easier to accomplish it because the structure is already there, and getting power to the roof is much easier. It's one level, and it's easier to do that. So it's not going to be a bigger cost to do it afterwards.
Got it. Okay. And I guess this is relevant to the HVAC at the courthouse. I gather that Fairfax has recently moved to net zero and for all government buildings. And I just wondered, that doesn't mean we should do it. It just, they're a bigger purchasing entity and the price of solar has gone so high. But I wondered if you could provide context. Am I understanding what Fairfax has done there right? And or can you get context as to that type of decision? And I think that's to Ms. McBride.
I'll defer to facilities, but I believe, I could be wrong, they went to net zero for new construction. In terms of solar, as you know, and I just wanted to add, the PPA contractor and vendor situation in Virginia, all the other 49 states around the world, is extremely unreliable right now. The PPA that we had executed, the vendor has come back at least twice and asked to renegotiate the price. At the same time, they're falling back and just collapsing on installations with other counties and cities in Virginia. This is not to, besmirch the vendor. It's just the market right now is really unpredictable. I think there's been some measures recently taken by the administration. There was a trade sanctions and trade bar and an international trade proceeding that was blocking any imports from all Southeast Asian countries. That was just lifted for 4 countries, excepting China, by the administration in the past 2 weeks. In addition, the administration has activated the American Defense Act in order to help stimulate domestic production, which we think is a great thing. I think we should probably expect the pricing for domestic products is going to be a little bit higher. The only thing that I would say is that in this particular area, we encourage and urge some patience, because remember that these PPA agreements are for anywhere from 20 to 30 years. So the deal that you lock in today is the deal you live with almost forever. So right now, there's just volatility, unreliability, ambiguity, and from week to week, it all changes. So if there's a hesitation to install the solar right away, the other thing that we'll be doing is doing more analytics on comparing the price, because if the PPA vendor with all of those additional administrative and profit margins, plus they have equity investors, and their equity investors are bringing a lot of pressure to bear on them now and really, doing risk mitigation. So if we compare all of those factors in another year, it may be that the price delta between owning the installation yourself and maintaining it yourself is not that large. And I would say that we are preparing now to release a master RFP that is going to cover 4 categories, 11 service areas, including renewables. So we're hoping that we're going to stimulate some exciting response to that RFP.
Thank you very much. I got a briefing on Monday on some of this, but I can use refresher, and the eagerness you gather, but I also understand and saw the coverage of the executive order. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Thanks. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, sort of the same area, Ms. McBride, for you. Could you describe a little bit more for what microgrid hubs are and what they would do under the resiliency section?
They're probably the core strategy in terms of ensuring resilience. And we have been very, very conceptually talking about where microgrid hubs might work at the most optimal service and really situate us in terms of if there's real inoperability. And we're talking about an interruption of power that would be at least 3 days. So the ability to serve vulnerable populations, the ability to also deliver those core services and operations would be, certainly you would rely on a microgrid.
And it's just quick question. Yeah. So it's actually producing, we're producing it. It's not just the grid that moves it. It's actually producing the energy for the grid too, like district energy or something like that.
It's producing, it's storing, there's district energy strategies. And basically what it's doing is islanding a particular area, and all the services and operations that come out of that area then have a greater reliability of being resilient and kind of bulletproof, Teflon, against those vagaries. Because these days you're one extreme weather event, you're one extreme civil event, you could be one extreme cybersecurity event away from interruption. The resilience that you see built into the CIP may not look like a lot of money over the 10-year CIP. The microgrids are expensive. They are a significant investment. But the investments that you see are both scheduled and scaled to pace us in those analytics, because those are going to take a lot of analytics, and it might even take a lot of public-private partnership discussions as well.
Great, thank you. I'm very supportive of that. It is much better for resiliency. Thank you. Did Mr. Emmanuel want to say something?
If you're also on.
I just wanted to respond to Mr. DeFranti's question, which was tied to Joan McIntyre's question about electrification, and address that in a little bit more detail with current information. As it turns out, it was just yesterday that Mike Moon and I went through a detailed conversation with Stephen Burr, who's great on Demetra's staff, about electrification in our modeling. In the context of the CIP, we are trying to figure this out in a way that gets us the maximum CO2 reduction for the money over time. So we've got this whole inventory of 90 facilities. We're trying to pick out some of those and model them as representative samples of the types of facilities we have and the dynamics we have. Each facility is a unique situation in terms of its heating and cooling loads and the site itself. And the site itself has many angles. So there's the roof area that's available for solar panels or heat pumps. There's the site area that may or may not be available for geothermal. And if we're lucky to be next to one of Jane's parks, and we work out a deal to, put a geothermal fill in, then that can work out. But not every site has that. Some sites, if we can make the technology work and bring in heat pumps, for example, in sufficient numbers and they fit on the roof or on the site, there may or may not be enough electrical capacity in the Dominion distribution system at that point. So then you have to factor that into the cost of increasing the electrical service to the site and then on the site with transformers and switch gears and so forth. So we are trying to model all those site-specific factors in a way that can be a resilient tool so that in future budgets and future CIPs, we can give you a more coherent strategy that's actually based on the modeling and the data. And we're hoping to illuminate that to both the board and the community and C2E2 with some cogent examples. And literally, it kind of indicated, Mr. DeFranti, the Courts Police Building, for example, which is like an example building with enormous demands, right? And so that may be one that we throw into the mix as an example of what it would take. Others on much lower demand, like I don't know, a nature center or something, may be much easier to achieve, depending on its site specifics. So it's actually kind of a complex analysis for each site. We're trying to find a way to model it and simplify it so we can communicate it and, of course, have a coherent strategy that gets the max bang for the buck as we're moving through implementation of the CIP.
Great, thank you. So,
Mr. Karen-Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Emanuel. Just to follow up on that. So I perfectly understand the need to model each facility or each unit, let's say, so that we can actually devise the best strategy to reduce the carbon emissions. So how is that supposed to work? Are we going to be reporting on that? Are we going to have a energy assessment for every building or every facility and say, so this is, for example, a facility that needs that is at that level today, and we want to bring it to that level, and this is the amount of effort or investment that we have. Is that the plan? Because, for example, in the smaller items of air, there is a advanced energy audits line item, for example. So is that part of it?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'll just try to say that we're trying to be solution-oriented and action-oriented to where we have a model that gets us close enough to where we then know which facilities to move into design process, or I go tell Rami or a successor to convert this one, let's throw some additional money on it. It's not just replace, it's replace with different and upgrade this other system. So let's adjust our budget estimate accordingly. So we're trying to move relatively quickly from the modeling to.
I'm just trying to figure out how on our side, on the public side, we will be able to see, register, record change, and measure success. That's the.
Well, yeah.
If I could just add on to that, what Greg is discussing, and I'm not going to pretend that I understand it. I think Greg and Mike, as engineers, probably understand it more than I do after yesterday. It's the development of what we're referring to as the decarbonization tool. And it's going to model single measures as well as bundled measures in particular buildings. There's been an extremely fulsome, lengthy period over the past 6 months, I would say, that's been devoted towards really data mining on every single building that this would apply to, because that helps the modeling. Then, of course, there's ECAP and measuring of the performance after the fact. And that has to be done here, of course, every year because you have seasonal changes and shifts, if there needs to be any adjustment. The item that you referred to inside the CIP is actually for renewable energy, and it's looking at a number of sites, and it's looking at what the capacity of those sites are for the production of on-site generation of energy. So then we can look and be better informed in whether or not it makes sense for the government to own the system and operate and maintain it, or whether it's a piece. There are going to be, of course, facilities that PPA vendors are going to say, no, it doesn't pencil out for us. But then we'll be able to come to the board, to the county manager, obviously, and go to Greg and Mike first, and really look at kind of the financials and the analytics on what about those sites. Is it worth doing solar, or is it maybe are there other measures that can get us to just as much energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and not just simply the solar roof? I'm not saying that's not a good measure, but this tool will give us that sophistication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's a really helpful explanation. On an entirely different note, I have what is possibly the least sophisticated type of question of but why does it cost so much ilk with regard to the Carlin Springs demolition? Ms. Congdon, you started to explain that to us about why it's just simply taking down that building has an estimated price tag of nearly $7 million. Some of the mold of asbestos mediation. Can you just help us understand, maybe with a little more granularity, about how it is that a demo project does get that expensive? Maybe is there some estimate of kind of cost per square foot that you can help us understand, the size of this project relative to others? the scale of the work required, the number of workers, the size of the contract, it is sort of startling to think, there is some, at least anyway, small facilities we could probably build for that amount. So just helping me understand a little more how we get to such a significant price tag for a demolition project.
Sure, it is a large building, as George talked about, so it is 140,000 square feet. 173. So it's a large building, so per square foot, it is accurate to some of the current prices that we're paying now.
Okay.
There are some specialty functions that are in that building that we wouldn't normally see in a regular building. There are some like swimming tanks that used to be used for like therapy and pools in the bottom of the facility. All that needs to be remediated and pulled out. So there's some additional things that typically we would not see in a regular building, like if it was an office building or something like that. It's an expansive landscape also. And then we do have, like we talked about, there's a lot of asbestos in the buildings. It's within the walls, the old flooring, and then also wrapping around a lot of the pipes.
Okay.
So that is there. And then there's also, there's a lot of mold that, because the building has been vacant for a long time, the mold has spread, and we weren't able to contain it. So that has kind of taken over a lot of the building. So that is more expensive to remediate that. And that, you can't, by code, we can't send somebody in just to demo, because people are like, oh, just demo it.
Yeah.
But the point is that a lot of that will then become airborne.
Okay.
And people will be breathing it in, and people outside of the building also will be breathing it in. So, it'll kind of get in the atmosphere and it'll kind of spread. So that is required, that we go in there and we abate everything, which is a large cost to that project.
Got it.
So it's a lot of specialty items, there's a lot of abatement, there's a lot of the mold that we have to do for remediation. There's also the way the building is built into the site on the slope, that we then need to go back and backfill some of that, that area, and then also do the stormwater management that's required.
Got it. So it's actually not, it sounds like it's not just taking down the buildings, it's also, I don't know if regrading would be the appropriate verb, but essentially treating the site so that the topography will be different and stormwater.
Yeah, so we'll have to make it like a slope, going down versus just remove the building and it would be like a sharp, we have to do that. And then when there's some trees that we need to plant and.
Okay, got it. That's helpful, thank you. And that is useful to know too, that it's an air quality issue for the surrounding neighborhoods, right, as much as it is for the workforce. Okay, that's helpful, I appreciate it. Any other questions for our facilities team or our building energy efficiency contacts? I know Ms. McBride, we'll see you again in probably a few other CIP programs. This is only but one facet of your work,
It's
right?
one I could think of.
Yes, one, okay, excellent.
I have 2 in 10 parts, but I'm going to email them now, Madam Chair.
All right, excellent. We appreciate you. Thank you all so much. I think we'll move now into the next part of our presentation. Mr. Manager,
Yes.
I don't know if you wanted to introduce the team from the Parks and Recreation staff.
Yes, I'm going to ask Jane Rudolph and Eric Beach to approach the court.
Oye. Is it Mr. Beach to start? Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having myself and others today. Before I get started, I just want to mention that there are some key staff involved in putting the CIP together this year. Jane Rudolph, who's here today with me. We have our Assistant Director, Becky Schmidt, Capital Asset Manager, Bob Capper, and our Budget Specialist, Brittany Canny, all whom were critical in developing this year's proposal and will be available to answer any questions when we get to that point in time. Slide, please. I'd like to start with an overview of the thinking that goes into how we assemble our 10-year CIP. We look at continuing our existing commitments to projects that have appeared in previous CIPs, existing projects that are underway, and projects that we have done engagement with the community on. We evaluate how those projects will help keep up our state of good repair and reduce the load on our life cycle replacement costs. We look at how we are distributing our investments across the county and how those proposed projects further the goals of our adopted plans, such as the Public Space Master Plan and the upcoming Forestry and Natural Resource Plan. There's To mention briefly, some key projects in the CIP are the Arlington Boathouse, Roslyn Gateway Park, and Crystal City Park projects. We have 2 new programs for emerging uses in natural resiliency, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. And lastly, we're looking at making a significant investment in converting 2 natural grass fields at Kenmore Middle School to synthetic turf. With the county's evolving efforts on achieving racial equity, DPR has been looking at how the core questions such as who benefits, who is burdened, and who is missing are addressed. When looking at these questions, we begin to see a picture of where our projects are located, the access and quality of our amenities, and how they relate to various neighborhoods, and the density of residents near our facilities, which has an impact on the quality and their experience in the use of those amenities. In our engagements for projects, we are looking at who is engaged and who did we miss. More specifically, we review how capital projects are distributed and their relationships to their adjacent neighborhoods. In managing our assets, you've heard me talk previously about our asset management study. This is typically a formulaic process that looks at where assets are, the current state of repair, and where they are in their life cycle. DPR is looking at adding an equity indicator to that formula that could have an impact on prioritization and where we select our projects. Our long-range planning looks at ensuring robust community engagement. Who is involved, who do we miss, how do we engage, and providing a variety of opportunities to bring more residents into those processes. And lastly, our projects are coordinated with our public spaces master plan, specifically the level of service and access delineated in that document. It's always good to take a moment and review some of our recent accomplishments. These projects were able to navigate constrained budgets over the last several years and challenges associated with COVID during the design and construction. The county opened the Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness Center last September. DPR made progress on our synthetic turf replacements with the replacement of the field at Virginia Highlands Park. And we opened 2 playgrounds at Secala and Rosalind Highlands Park, as well as more progress made on our trail and bridge replacements, and very recently opened Jenny Dean Park. DPR manages a broad range of assets. I think this slide might be becoming familiar to folks now, but across 147 parks and almost 1,000 acres of land, assets that need to be maintained or replaced include 81 playgrounds, 180 different types of courts, 17 synthetic fields, 9 dog parks, 25 restrooms, a slew of convenience amenities such as tables, benches, grills, and drinking fountains. In addition, we have 126 acres of natural resource conservation areas and maintain 250,000 trees that account for about 69% of our canopy cover. With all those assets, the question is sometimes raised in how we manage them to keep up a state of good repair and where we are with that work.
How do you manage them?
That's a lot of management.
I'm just raising the question.
Some highlights include $23 million invested in our parks and playgrounds since 2018 that have provided for the renovation or new construction of 25 parks. The 20-year life cycle of renovation allows us to reduce our ongoing maintenance costs and make progress on our list of projects. The county has invested $10 million in 9 synthetic field replacements and 1 turf conversion since 2018. Each of these have about an 8 to 10-year life cycle, and we are able to progress through our rotation of these fields. We've invested about $5 million in our trail and bridge program, and each trail, once it's done, has about a 20-year life cycle, and we've replaced over 2.5 miles of trail since 2018. When we evaluate bridges and fords, they have about a 50-year life cycle. Of the 67 bridges and low-water fords in our inventory, we've identified 15 of these that are a priority for replacement or major repair in the next 10 years. This year, I think you're familiar, the county has introduced a new mapping tool that will allow residents to find the location and information on projects that are underway or funded. This map specifically boils it down to show 20 DPR projects that are funded in various stages of design, permitting, or construction, with 15 proposed projects potentially on the way. The map begins to show the county's investment in denser neighborhoods and helps us identify gaps for future investment. At this point, before getting to what is upcoming, it's helpful to remember what has come previously. Earlier this year, the board adopted or approved a variety of projects as part of the PAYGO process. These include our program that provides for DPR's asset manager, design work at Bailey's Branch and Woodmont Parks, the construction of Bluemont Tennis Court replacement, and the replacement of the track at Greenbar Park and synthetic turf at Wakefield High School. As a quick overview, and we'll turn to the slide a bit later, DPR's CIP is comprised of 5 buckets: a maintenance capital, park master plan, trail and bridge modernization program, land acquisition, and synthetic turf program. The rest of the presentation will follow these categories. Within the overall CIP, Parks Master Plan account for just over half the project funding. A quarter of our funding is allocated to the Parks Maintenance Capital Program, with the remaining 3 programs comprising the remaining quarter of our funding. General obligation bonds account for almost 2/3 of how we pay for our programs. The rest of the funding is roughly evenly split between developer contributions, TIF, and other funding sources, such as our partnership with Marymount University and APS. DPR's 2022 bond referendum is proposed to be just about $20.4 million. The parks maintenance capital projects in that total are construction funding for Moreau, Bailey's Branch, and Woodmont Parks, which had their design previously funded, and Douglas Park, which is for design and construction. The park master plan projects included our 3 urban parks, Jenny Dean, Phase 2, Shortbridge Park, Arlington Boathouse, 2 new programs called Emerging Uses Natural Resources, Natural Resiliency, and lastly, a portion of our funding for the Trail and Bridge program. I'd like to now provide some more detail on the specific projects laid out in the CIP, and these are for the maintenance capital program bucket, if you will. These include construction funding for Monroe Park is included in 2023. This will replace the playgrounds and address ADA issues and other amenities. The design and construction of the west side or more natural side of Douglas Park, which is proposed for 23 and 25. This will improve degrading picnic shelters, furnishings, and other site improvements. As design funding was previously approved, construction funding is proposed for Bailey's Branch Park to address the aging playground. The project is a partnership with the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, and they will, this is about a 50-50 partnership. Woodmont Park playground shares some similar issues to Bailey's Branch in that the playground manufacturer is no longer in existence, and we can't replace the parts, and when they fail, we have to remove them. Funding will provide for replacement of that playground. Okay, the projects starting on this slide are now found in our master plan category. Generally, the following projects have appeared in previous CIPs, with the exception of our 2 new programs, Emerging Uses and Natural Resiliency, and we'll talk about them in a bit. In 23 and 25, we are proposing to master plan, design, and construct 3 urban parks in the Virginia Square area. These 3 parks, Maury, Hersel Milliken, and Gumball, are 3 small parks that will be looked at comprehensively, so as we don't we have complementary uses rather than duplicative features. With the county's understanding that WETA plans to move to their Campbell Ave building by the end of 2023, funding in 23 and 24 will allow the county to demolish the existing building, 2 parking lots and a portion of 27th Street South, and we'll be able to incorporate these lands into Jenny Dean Park and finish our master plan work there. Shortbridge Park has had an adopted master plan since 2018, and DS is expected to finish up its trail work connecting the 4 Mile Run Trail to Route 1 very soon. This work completes infrastructure that will enable DPR to move forward with our design and construction in FY23 and 25 for this 3.5-acre park at the mouth of 4 Mile Run. The project includes a plaza, dog run, casual use spaces, site furnishings, and stormwater management facilities. I think that most people are aware that in May 2019, the county board signed a programmatic agreement with the National Park Service and others to develop a boathouse and related facilities, and that agreement provided until 2029 to construct the boathouse. The project involves a lower Roslyn site, which is adjacent to the Potomac River for direct water access, and an upper Roslyn site on land that the county owns for support facilities. With funds for master planning previously approved, and that work anticipated to start at the end of this year or very early next, this proposed funding would allow design to start in FY24 and construction of the lower site to start in 27. The CIP assumes 60% this will be county funding and 40% developer or partner funding for construction of the lower site. Just want to note that construction of the upper site is outside of this 10-year CIP. However, the planning and design work provided by the CP will allow the county to get a good handle on the program cost and any potential phasing of that upper site. Gateway Park is a key public space in Roslyn. As Roslyn's major public space and literal gateway to DC and vice versa, it's needed significant investment. Last year, the board and VDOT signed a use permit that provided the county control of the site. It also conveyed multiple pedestrian bridges and structures that are now the county's responsibility to maintain. The project, for the purpose of the CIP, has been divided into east and west sides, with Fort Myers Drive being the dividing line. Proposed funding is for $1.8 million in FY25 for design work of the east side. $15.8 million for construction of the east side in 27, and $1.8 million for the design of the west side out in FY32. The CP calls for a healthy amount, almost $5 million of funding, to be offset by developer and other funding sources. The amount and timing of that funding may impact the ultimate timing of the ultimate build out of the project. Phase 1 of Penrose Square opened in 2012. The approved adjacent development is moving forward and is expected to be completed by the end of 2024. This project will convey to the county the public space that comprises the Phase 2 area of the Penrose Park Master Plan. And funding here in 26 and 27 will allow the design and construction of the build-out of that park master plan and expanding the existing uses. Previous CIPs have included funding for a variety of Crystal City parks and public spaces. However, this category has always been a bit of a challenge for us due to the fluidity of the market and how development has actually played out in Crystal City. With the advancement of Amazon's developments and some adjacent projects, we are pretty able now to get a firmer handle on the timing priority of the park development sequencing in Crystal City. With the timing of the adjacent development known and heavy investment by the county in the new Metro access elevator, funding in 23 and 24 will allow the design of Metro Market Square to follow that elevator work. The second Crystal City project is Phase 1 of Center Park, which will be a new 2-acre centrally located park program for active uses in gathering space in 25 and 27. And lastly, the 23rd Street Plaza, which is located on the northeast corner of 23rd and Clark Bell Streets, is set for 26 and 28 to follow the approval of the site plan that is currently progressing through the 4.1 process. Okay. The last two master plan programs I'd like to talk about are two new programs in the CIP, Emerging Uses and Natural Resiliency. We're very excited about the potential that these two programs have to address issues that are current in our community. The first Emerging Uses program is proposed to be funded every other year starting in FY23. This program is designed to respond to emerging recreational activities and uses in parks that are rooted in some of the recommendations that we had in the 2019 Public Spaces Master Plan. The way people use our parks continually evolves or is subject to outside forces such as a COVID pandemic. Traditionally, we discuss these uses, get them into the CIP, the outer years of the CIP, then we plan, we design, and we construct, meaning it might be 10 to 12 years before we are seeing reaction to something that we're dealing with now. This program is intended to proactively allocate funding to address issues in more real time. As an example, funding in FY23 is set to fund the design and construction of a permanent pickleball facility at the Walter Reed Community Center based on a court study that the county is currently undertaking with the community. In the future, this program might address uses such as skateboarding, pump tracks, or dog parks in a proactive manner. The Natural Resiliency Program similarly is proposed to be funded every other year starting in FY24. This program is intended to address what is currently being discussed in the community as soft capital or soft assets. Traditionally, trees, streams, and biophilic elements have been aspects of our capital projects. However, this program will pull them together front and center as focused projects. Large-scale reforestation or invasive removals could be undertaken with this program. DPR manages small streams and erosion issues throughout our 147 parks and 1,000 acres. And these streams are generally tend to be outside of the priority stream projects addressed by the stormwater program. However, they do need care and to have erosion issues addressed. Additionally, the program may provide the ability to provide biophilic elements to existing projects. And the last interesting area that this program would like to explore is looking at flood resilient projects. These might be projects that provide some kind of flood capacity and recreational amenities in the same area that might flood and then go back to recreational uses once the water is receded. And we have been looking at similar projects in other communities that do this. Take a moment to talk about some of the notable projects that are in the more out years of the CIP. Quincy Park has some aging facilities such as our tennis courts that will need to be addressed. However, it seems appropriate to look at Quincy Park comprehensively prior to making any major investment. The CIP proposes funding in 2031 to begin master planning work to see how the uses work together and to relate to other uses such as the library. Shirlington Park would be the second public space to be addressed as part of the 4 Mile Run Valley initiative with design and construction starting in 2031. The inclusion of Fairfax Drive public spaces is driven directly by the recent adoption of the Clarendon Sector Plan update. Funding in 2029 will begin the master planning design and construction of the spaces called for in that plan. Similarly, Virginia Highlands Park is included as a result of the recent adoption of the Pentagon City Sector Plan. Funding will allow for the master planning design and construction to begin in 2028. The plan will be to master plan Virginia Highlands Park along with 2 property acquisitions at 20th Street South and South Ive Street and a new parcel at the former Dominion substation site. Our Trail and Bridge program is proposed to be funded annually starting in 2023. This program provides for assessment and replacement of 40 miles of trails and bridges and fords. Recently, we've replaced 1 bridge in Lumberman Park, with the 2nd bridge entering the permit stage for replacement. We are currently starting replacements for bridges in Alcova Heights and Bluemont Parks. Both of these bridges need replacement and have severe ADA issues. Recently completed trail work includes milling and paving of portions of Arlington Boulevard, Bluemont Junction, 4 Mile Run Trail, and some others, and we'll begin design work at Donaldson Run Trail and 26 Knoll Dominion Trailhead next. Also importantly, we're going to be looking at updating our trail condition assessment in the next year. A priority action in our public spaces master plan is the recommendation of that 30 acres of new public space be added to our inventory over the next 10 years. This program is meant to strategically acquire that property in order to accomplish the goal. This program has not been funded since 2017. However, this CIP proposes to address that starting in 2023. Even without dedicated funding, I'd like to just make a note here. It doesn't mean that the county has not made progress towards adding towards the public space master plan goal. The table at the bottom of the slide, on the left and the bottom of the slide, shows property that has been acquired or conveyed to the county in a way that the county permanently controls. This includes our last acquisition at Fort Scott Park and property like VDOT land at Jenny Dean that was conveyed to the county. These types amount for about just over 5 acres. The table on the right shows public spaces that have either already been implemented or approved as part of site plans and will be coming along the road that place public access easements over privately owned land in total about 7 acres. So altogether, about 12 acres of publicly accessible land has been added to our inventory since 2019. The synthetic turf program provides the replacement of our inventory of synthetic turf fields. This chart shows our fields on their 10-year replacement cycle. The turf field at Wakefield High School will be replaced in 23, with Washington Liberty and Williamsburg Middle School fields in 24. It might be noted here that the schedule includes $12 million to convert 2 fields at Kenmore Middle School to synthetic turf. This is a sizable project due to the large amount of grading, fencing, light, and stormwater facilities needed to make that conversion. And the county was able to coordinate with the partners at APS to find a year that worked for both parties in our CIP in 2030. So just briefly returning, this slide we looked at earlier shows our program summary and the wrap up of our 5 categories. It totals almost $272 million over 10 years. We were able to achieve a fairly balanced yearly total over the 10 years, except in 27 where we have 2 major projects in Gateway and Boathouse converging. This slide shows a breakdown of our funding sources. I think the takeaway that I might leave you with here is that of our $272 million, we have significant outside funding sources to help defray some of these costs. We have over $15 million developer funding, $13 million in other funding sources, such as partnerships with Marymount and APS, and over $50 million in TIF funding. Just a quick few thoughts to wrap up my presentation. As I had just mentioned, of the $272 million 10-year program, $20.4 million is requested as part of the 22 bond referendum. Land acquisition has been a challenge for us in the past, but this CIP begins to address that. The fluidity of the market in Crystal City has been challenging for our program. However, we believe that events have converged to give us a level of confidence this year on how to proceed with park investment there. In regard to the Boathouse, the CIP continues to meet our commitments as outlined by our agreement with the National Park Service for 2029. And lastly, we're very excited about our 2 new proposed programs, emerging uses and natural resiliency, and we think their ability to proactively address issues that arise. So with that, I conclude my presentation and willing to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Beach. I do not believe we were joined by any commissions in person today. I will note that we are in receipt of letters from both the Parks and Recreation Commission as well as the Sports Commission, the former of which weighs in particularly on that goal of the acquisition, of land acquisition, the latter of which is generally supportive, but notes some concerns and urgency around turf conversion, which I know Ms. Garvey in particular is prepared to follow up on. So with that, I will open it up for questions. Mr. DeFranti, I see you with the first light.
I feel like the worst of the gunners in law school. I'm just trying to help.
Somebody's got to be first.
Yeah. Can you just confirm synthetic turf versus grass turf? I remember distinctly what I think was synthetic turf when I was in high school playing soccer on it, and it was like concrete, and it was hard to, it was very difficult to play on. Is it the grass turf that has it's darker usually, and it has the little, it seems more forgiving for exercising, more forgiving? Do I have that right?
You're correct. Actually, I have played on the same turf that you're referring to back in, I won't call them the olden days, but turf has come a long way. The synthetic turf that we use now is actually grass fiber, generally 1.5 inches to 2 inches grass fiber. And then there is some kind of infill rubberized or other material that takes up about inch of that. And so it is a forgiving surface for impact. In fact, there's an attenuation on there that you can play football on it, and there's a measurement to make sure it's one of the ways we maintain our 10-year cycle is making sure that attenuation number is maintained. And so they age out and that attenuation goes down and it becomes a safety issue. But these fields are much different. They play a lot like natural grass, more like natural grass, and there are actually some benefits for playing there rather than perhaps compacted natural surfaces.
And we're, over a few years, we're switching all to the grass type, the new type?
I don't believe that's the goal. I think that we have a number where we're probably getting fairly close to maintaining, where we'll just maintain a inventory of them.
Yeah.
There are a few more conversions I think that are probably key for rectangular and perhaps in the diamond area, but I don't think the goal is to convert all of them. There is a need to have a mix, and there's a cost to maintaining those fields.
But I just want to be clear, we still have many grass fields that have dirt under them, not like,
Yeah.
so we have our grass fields, and then we have our plan for synthetic turf fields, and then some conversions. So they're two different materials, but the style that you're describing we don't have that style anymore. They're all based on what Eric is describing, which is the sort of much more on the synthetic side, the padded type, that is really much safer to play on for synthetic. And then we also have many, many grass fields still in the county.
Great, thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
And if you'd like to physically hold a sample of that infield, I'd invite you to my home, which is constantly littered with those because we have an adult soccer player in our house. But no, thank you. And actually, apropos of that, I will note I'm just so struck by now versus where we were 4 years ago at the time of the Public Spaces Master Plan, when there was a real challenge around field maintenance, field scheduling, and I think the fact that that program, to me, feels, I know it doesn't feel to staff this way, somewhat on autopilot, represents a pretty amazing amount of work by our sports commission, by our staff, by the leagues themselves to really improve scheduling and maximizing those turf fields for heavier use. So a big thanks to all involved. Mr. Karantonis and then Ms. Garvey with questions.
Oh, I fully appreciate the utility of the synthetic turf. I mean, at the level of use that we have here, there is absolutely not. I don't know if this is for a follow-up. If we provide also the evening use everywhere, I think most of the synthetic turfs are lit right in the night. So that maximizes the views even more. The only question that I don't remember, it has been answered at some point, is what is the end of life of these? They're useful for about 10 years, but what happens after that? Are they recyclable anyway, or?
So there is a recycling program for the turf that comes off the fields. I'm not sure of all the details, but when they're replaced, when you construct a new field, there is a stone sub base and a drainage system, and then the turf and the infill. When you replace them, just the turf and the infill is replaced, and so that turf is recycled as well as the infill.
And part of the materials themselves are recycled already, so from tires, etc. So one completely different question here. On the master planning list, the Virginia Highlands Park is slated to be master planned relatively late in the CIP. What manages this timeline? What is the commanding variable here?
So I think a couple things factor into where several of these projects line up. There's been a lot of questions about projects not, like them a little sooner or a little later. Virginia Highlands is a result of the work that was done as part of the Pentagon City Sector Plan update, but it becomes a new project for the 10-year CIP. And so when we formulate the CIP, we are really trying to look at some of the things we have commitments for, have shown up in previous CIPs and things like that. So it's a matter of working it in to the correct overall timeline as far as budgeting our projects as DPRs relates to the rest of the CIP across the county. There is some advantage of the time frame that's there. It will allow some time for APS to get a handle on what they may want to do, what kind of service they may want to provide in that community, and that may allow some better synergies between our work and their work when the time comes.
Thank you. The other part that I wanted to ask is the Penrose Square Phase 2. So this building will they will begin with demolition now, so we count that, 2.5 years this will be done. So but the Penrose Square, the CIP appropriation for Penrose Square kicks in fiscal year '26. So this is more or less exactly when, this starts exactly when the new building will be done.
There's
So there
two
won't be-
phases, though, of the building, aren't there? The new building
Yes,
is
so this is why
two
I'm asking. So I want to know whether there will be this interim situation that we have with phase one, where we had a grass area for quite a long time, or this will be part of the construction and will be relatively, delivered relatively soon.
So this timing does put, if the development holds its timeline, which is the first variable, and so they are estimating end of '24 to be complete with their building. That remains to be seen if that timeline holds. This would start us in subsequent work on the design and the construction. So there would be an interim period. As part of the approval, I think the board did several months ago, there was an interim parks plan that came with that approval. So the developer will be making an investment on, I won't call it grandiose, but some investment in seating and pathways and some landscaping features and trees in there. It's not, I don't want to make it sound more than it is, but it is an interim plan to make it more than the grass area that may have been with Penrose One. I live right near there and experienced the grass area for many years before we came in with our development.
Okay, I just wanted to wrap my head around what the timing of all this is. I yield. I have a question on the land acquisitions.
All right, we'll definitely do another round. Ms. Garvey and then Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah. So I have several questions, but I'll start with the Kenmore one. That's fine. And it was really three questions. One, and I think you may have said, but I didn't quite catch what it was, why the Kenmore field is costing so much more. I gather it has something to do with stormwater, but if you talk a little more about that. And then it was originally going to be being in the CIP for doing a lot earlier, and now it's way out at the end, which has some folks concerned. And then I've been asked if people can raise money, is there a way that they could, move it up or help get some of the fields done if there's stormwater things? I gather they're all probably mixed up if that's what it is, but people would like to be able to know if they could raise some money and help out getting it moved up faster. So a lot of questions, but I did prepare you.
I think I've got, I jotted them down, so I have the three that I think if I forget one, let me know. So I think the first place to start is Kenmore and the estimate that is in this CIP for 2030 and some of the conversation that has happened around. There was an estimate in our 10-year replacement schedule in the FY19 to 28 CIP, the last adopted 10-year CIP, had in our out-year replacement or mid-year replacement in 2021, roughly about $5 million to do that project in 21. What I can say to that end is that we approach our estimating for that replacement cycle differently now than we did in previous CIPs. At that time, we were using a placeholder number, if you will, and so all conversions were $2 million, all replacements were $1 million. And so when you took those numbers and you escalated 21, it came out to the roughly $5 million that was in that CIP. Currently, we are actually doing site analysis and evaluation before we put an estimate in that document there, a little bit more robustly. And so what we have found is that there's significant grade change at Kenmore. And this is a sizable area. This is 2 fields and actually a little bit more because it incorporates some of the diamond field there. So it's a very large turf project. There's significant grading that you have to do to make that a playable surface all the way across. We have some ADA issues that we have to address to be able to connect those facilities to restrooms that are located at the schools, and there's some elevation issues there. We also have stormwater facilities that just were not as robustly addressed as they were. Now they're more robustly addressed now according to current regulations than we were anticipating in 2019, as well as just things that we know have to, as part of those projects, lighting, fencing, things like this. So our estimate has it at about a $9.5 million project, and that, if you take that and escalate it from now to 2030, is the $12 million project in our CIP. The project in 2019 CIP should have been a $9.5 million project, most likely at that time as well. But it was just a different approach. It was placeholder numbers for out years and things like that. So we feel we have a pretty good grasp on the actual cost of this project. So that's sort of why it's so expensive and how we got to where we are. 2030 is the year, we are partners with the schools with the way we approach the CIP, particularly at joint facilities. 2030 was a year that they had less of a commitment for replacement costs currently of our current inventory. Also for us, balancing across our programs, it was a year that worked for both entities in 2030 to locate it there. Can people raise funding? Certainly, I think we have that. We've done that before. Gunston is a great example of funding that came in. Did I lose power? No, there we go. That was able to enable that project, and so I think that the year of 2030 provides opportunity for funding to be raised, and if depending on how that goes, we will have subsequent CIPs between now and then. That adjustment could be made to the year that's in the CIP.
Can you go a little bit, why does it have to be so far? It was something to do with APS? Is it funding for them, or is it something they're doing with the site?
So it was more of the number work of the two CIPs, and I'm not blaming this on APS. I don't want to give that impression at all. When we look across, if you look at our 10-year CIP chart that we have, there are certain years that have fairly heavy investment from APS because they have to meet their joint allotment of the sharing cost there. And so in 2030 and 29, or 2030 and 31, there were less fields in the rotation that schools would need to participate in. So they have more money available in out-year planning then for those 2 years.
So if the money weren't a problem, and I don't know that these folks could raise enough for the APS, we could move it up. There's not a physical management reason we couldn't move it up. It's mostly money. Is that the case?
From a project implementation and on-site challenges for schools, I don't believe there would be anything that would withhold that.
Sorry, what could you?
I don't believe anything that would stop us from moving it forward.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that maybe we could. All right. Thank you. That's a good start. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the boathouse project, and one, if someone can speak to the capacity of the external partners to raise 40% of the project budget. Do you have a status update of where they are to date? And secondarily, what are our conceptions for how this boathouse could be used to provide broader benefit to provide river access to Arlingtonians beyond those who may participate in cruise sports?
So it's a two-part question. And so the first part is that the funding split, I believe you asked about the 60-40 funding split. So part of that is the funding is in 2027, which will allow several years for our partners to organize and create, donation or fundraising targets and things like this. Part of when you do work like that is they kind of need to know have something to sell or something to be a design to be able to work towards. So at this point, I don't believe there's a formal commitment for any of our partners to have funding targets or in hand. That is work that's going to begin when we get into our master planning work here in the fall in order to begin to work with them and understand our goals and the use and the program of that facility and able to kind of implement a program for them to be able to go out and raise funding. There are also other avenues that I don't know at this time if we have a sense of, but there are other federal dollars, things like this, that we will need to kind of work towards to see if we can bring all that together to make the project funding complete.
So to push on that funding piece a little bit, and then if you can get to use and access to others beyond the rowing community, is there a conceivable scenario, given the external deadline of 2029, that Arlington County could be left holding the bag for delivery of the project, however it is conceived, because of the failure to receive federal dollars or the inability of a partner or partners to raise the requisite funds?
So I think that it will be part of the overall approach as we sort of go in a measured way of looking at our master planning work and then our design work. I think we will have to work with our partners and other locations to have to outline commitment and make a judgment as to the future CIPs, how we adjust what we are going to do, or the scope of the project, for example, is another way to account for that issue. If the funding commitments are one way, we can adjust scope and things like this as well to kind of have them meet in the middle. I don't know if I've answered that far enough for you, but if I can move to the second part of the question, if you'd like.
Please, thank you.
So I think we talk about the boathouse as far as the rowing community. I think the rowing community is folks obviously have a very high level of interest and would like to see this come to fruition. I think that from a DPR perspective, one of the most exciting things about the boathouse is access to the water. One of the things we've consistently heard across almost all the planning efforts that I've been involved with, 2 rounds of the Public Spaces Master Plan update, is access to the water is an issue for Arlington as a community. It has always been a priority, both in our last version and the new version, to provide access. And so I could not imagine any boathouse that would not provide a means to provide other access, such as kayak or canoe, educational opportunities around that. To me, that's a critical part of the project, and that would be key for having a successful project in the end.
Thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Ms. Garvey on the
Yeah,
boat.
just a follow-up. Is it possible to get access to the water before the boathouse gets built? In other words, is there a way we can get the site so that people can get down? Because you don't need a boathouse for a canoe, right? Or even to go down and stand by the river.
So we might have to come back with an answer on that question because so I guess there's 2 ways to look at this question. So we have access to the water via Roosevelt Island and other locations. Arlington residents have access to that, so I don't mean to be facetious, but there's a pretty broad access way that is controlled by the county to get to the water. There's several levels of agreement still to go through the Park Service, and a physical structure is so integral into their access and how we create those agreements. It would be something we would have to have a conversation if there's any pre-access we could have or something like that. It's just not an answer I'm sure I certainly have a certain answer to right now.
Okay, thank you.
I would also just highlight also, this is a very complicated engineering project on how we're going to achieve it. And access to the waters, Eric, or Mr. Beach, excuse me, was saying, that's like being able to get close to the water, but to actually put into the water, there's dredging that needs to happen. There's understanding of, like, you can't just go down and put a floating dock in the water. So I think Eric is right. There's a lot of work we need to do with National Park Service to understand the site and understand what we can do there. So we will definitely keep you all posted as we go through this early work with them this coming year. But I think we'll learn more as we kind of get into it.
Okay. I think, it'd be great if we get some of that dredging, some of that work done before you actually get the physical building done. If some of the site work or whatever could be done, it might be helpful.
So the boathouse project is essentially shorthand for the boathouse and physical improvements to access the water project. It's not really just about building the structure, right?
Correct. You would need to build a floating dock as well to actually provide the physical access into the water. And there's a lot of, because it's that narrow, Eric could speak more to it, but the narrow canal, there's going to be dredging that needs to get done and other types of work. So there's just a lot to be done.
And you have to work through the Park Service to do it. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, well, sticking with Roslyn, I wanted to ask just a couple questions about Gateway Park. I am interested, if we can, in moving up the planning dollars, if not the actual construction dollars. I think there is a real opportunity here for potentially a really major public-private partnership in one of our big urban parks. We certainly have some committed or agreed upon developer contributions, but more importantly, I think there are quite a few development interests, private interests, resident interests in the area that I would love to see us be able to kind of organize around the tentpole of an adopted plan of what we know is going to be a complex and expensive project. So my questions are actually relatively specific, which is that right now that planning money of about 1.8 million is designated in fiscal 2025. If we are interested in moving that up, I want to confirm that the likely earliest, given just staff capacity, would probably be fiscal 2024, right? Not 2023. And if so, could you just, for purposes of sort of how I spend my time over the next few weeks, we would then need to add that to the planning dollars for Gateway Park. If we were to do it in fiscal 2024, that would need to be part of the bond referendum for this fall. Is that right? That might be a DMF question. I see Ms. Talley nodding. Okay, so the answer is yes on that
Yes,
one.
that's correct.
Okay, great. And then just in terms of the 2025 being the earliest, would that be the case?
So to help clarify a little bit, so we're all speaking the same language, the county actually has funds to begin a master plan in hand. And so the master plan work we were funded from and I'm going to draw a blank on a adjacent development down there, had already provided about $500,000 in funding already. So that is in hand. So we are looking at starting master planning work later this year.
Okay.
I want to just kind of make sure I'm transparent in that because Gateway is fairly complex, we need to do a structural analysis and we have to do some other information collection. So the community engagement side of that most likely probably will not start until early next year sometime. The funding in 25 is for design work. It's to take an adopted master plan and translate that into design for the construction documents. Given that the master plan will probably take, I'm going to be very honest, with the community engagement and board adoption is about a year. That would put us at the end of 23. And so if you were to move up the design money to 24, that timing would be fine because we could move faster into design. I will just mention that will put a little bit larger gap between the design and when the construction starts, which sometimes, but I'm hesitant to mention this, but you could also address it the other way. You could also move the design, the planning farther out to be a little bit less gap that way. And I'm not suggesting that's what we want to do, but that's the timing of the CIP was to keep an even pace, rhythm to it. But there would be no reason that we wouldn't be able to undertake that if that was to happen.
That's a great point, and especially given what we're seeing with, just sort of really significant escalations, I can imagine the challenges of having an adopted design, right, with planning dollars further out. What does seem exciting to me is potentially the timing of, the sort of relatively expeditious sequence of the adoption of the master plan with the design to follow. Design might then tie neatly into the next 2-year CIP update. So if there were opportunities for either advancing the public contribution or maybe advocating for more private contribution to expedite as well.
Can I add something on that? Because first of all, I appreciate that answer. Also, we got a letter from Mr. Bushkoff and other people who've been working closely with the Roslyn bid on this.
Mm-hmm.
They've, we love the Roslyn bid. They're great partners. And I think that if we have the design work done earlier than we're anticipating, we will not, as of right now, have the extra cash for construction, but we could think about planning with perhaps the bid on some additional contributions from them, if they were interested. So there might not be as long a gap between when we complete the design and when we start construction. So we're excited about that, especially given that the businesses there see the upside for having that kind of a gateway facility into the county for people in Roslyn to use. And I know that we'd be excited if we could do it earlier. We just have to, we have to pay attention to what the costs are going to be.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Okay, so round 2 of questions. Mr. DeFranti, would you like to start?
Sure. I didn't quite, I don't know how best to do this. I didn't quite get to, on Kenmore, I wanted to see if there's a way to structure the conversation as to moving that forward, right? The CIP is iterative, so there's 9 million to 12 million in terms of cost, and if there are any funds that could be freed up, do you have any advice or thoughts about how to structure that? I suppose it's not totally dissimilar from the boathouse in the sense that there could be a private partnership component. But is there any way to do that, or sort of, because saying you can raise funding is different from actually getting that funding on hand. And so I don't know if there's thoughts about that, or if that's a follow-up written question. I'm trying to kind of take Ms. Garvey's questions and figure out if there's, what, if anything, there might be to do to see if we can move that forward.
So I think that in looking at how Kenmore plays into the overall CIP and the replacement conversion schedule that we have.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's fairly sizable, so it does impact not only that, it also impacts some of our other projects and things that we do. I do think, though, that unless we were, and I'm not saying this, but as an example, unless we were thinking about moving it into the next 2 years, I think that we could work with our partner agencies to try to define how much dollars they may be able to bring to the project, and what impact that may have on what year it could go in and how that impacts escalation. And then that would be something we might revisit in the next CIP, but that's one way to approach it. I think there has to have some more advanced conversations to understand where we are. I'm kind of looking at, I sure it off just in case he has an opinion on that, but.
I agree. I don't think right now it would not be feasible to move it into these first 2 years. And so we'd have to work with our partners potentially first to figure out a framework of how much they could raise. I think in the CIP, it indicates it could be up to $2 million of private funding. We also have a 70-30 split with APS. So there's a coordination that would need to happen, public, private, and then with APS. And so I think there might be opportunities if we were to maybe move it up potentially a year or two. But I think in this 2-year cycle, that's not, and I'm not sure there would be ability to raise that kind of funding in 2 years as well. So I think Mr. Beach is correct that we have an opportunity to continue that conversation. I think the fact, to be honest, that it's even showing up, it's a really amazing project and it would really solve a lot of our needs. And the fact that it's showing up in the CIP and kind of putting a marker there is really helpful for us to be able to then plan that public-private and APS partnership moving forward.
Great. That helps me a lot because I wasn't thinking the next 2 years. I am thinking, as I think all of us are, of the equity implications, and I don't quite recall how we do the process for sort of whether we do comments on our CIP or what that would look like, but that's helpful for me. And that covers the only other thing that I might follow up is remembering the process for the language on the bonds and 3 urban, is the slide 12, sort of the same as what we would put in the language for the bonds, or is there wordsmithing that happens? I know we want to keep flexibility, but I also wonder if, 3 urban parks or emerging uses, there's probably a few thousand people who might want the word pickleball in there, but I don't think it only has to be pickleball, but I just mean emerging recreational uses. I feel like there are, in California, I used to vote on stuff that I never understood what I was voting on. So I just, as far as bonds. And so I wondered if this isn't the final language, or how does that work?
So the bond language had the past has been much more generic. I would have to defer to one of my colleagues in DMF about exactly how we address that. I think with Karen maybe giving me a hand signal.
We don't have to do it now.
Well, process-wise, if I could just confirm, we will vote on the bond language at the same time we adopt the CIP in July, correct? So that's a great question. I actually think there's probably some iteration to be done. I have the same bugaboo that you do in wanting the language to balance broadness to actually pursue different projects, but being specific enough that we're being transparent with the community. So just flag that for body of work for us to weigh in and on.
We try very hard, just speaking as a former DMF director, to keep maximum flexibility for us as staff, and the community has a real hard time with that, as they should. Because they want to get very specific, but you can get into a situation where we would set aside on the emerging uses or these kinds of things where you set aside a chunk of money, and if you say it's for pickleball, for example, and then you go ahead and you build the project and it comes in under budget, then you're left with money that you can only use for pickleball. And I will tell you, at my house, that would be greeted, but I'm not sure in other places that people would feel the same way about it. So we try to balance it by having the bond language itself be somewhat generic, and then the explanation that comes with it to be fairly specific. And I think if you go back and look over the course of our history, we have stayed very true to that, but we are always open to wordsmithing on that.
Thank you. Okay, I think our order here was Mr. Carantonis next.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle on the, back on the perennial question about what drives our decisions or the proposal of how much money we put in the Parks Acquisition Fund. So that was, headlining the Parks and Recreation Commission's letter that we received today. So the question is, how does the goal in our master plan, the 30 acres acquisition goal, how is it served by the money that we put there, or is it just an auxiliary pot of money, and we have other sources that we can serve and react to opportunities? So how we go about that?
So how the exact dollar amount is set, I think I would need to expand to some of my colleagues to kind of talk through that. But what I can mention is that we have the goal in the public space master plan of the 30 acres over 10 years. During the presentation, I did talk about some of the other ways we do that that may not be a direct acquisition or a cost. With the $5 million in the CIP, in the past, the county has been very helpful to us in that have identified when opportunities have arose, if the dollars weren't there, to help us find other funding sources for that. I believe, for example, the WETA building is not being purchased out of land acquisition funding, but it was important to the county, to you folks, thank you, and to the manager, that other sources were found. So what I would want to say is, although the number is low, not many opportunities have slipped by when it has been important for us to be able to acquire them. And so just another way to think about it a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, thank you. A couple of, if I can, just quick planning questions. On the nature centers, we have some folks concerned about the nature centers there. I think from the note on page C73, it looks like it's $250,000 in bond funding for planning for Lee and the nature centers, and I'm not quite sure if it's spread over. So could you explain to me exactly how much money is going to be available for planning for the nature centers and when?
I might need to call my colleague Greg Emanuel back up, because that actually is in the DES budget for planning, but I think that funding is for the nature centers and Lee too. And Lee Center as well, as those are the kind of facilities that are managed, as a facility, are managed by DES, and then we occupy them. So any kind of future planning for the nature centers is a partnership between our two departments.
Partnerships are good. That's good. Thank you.
We can get back to you on the detailed breakout if we knew that, but I think it is lumped together.
Yeah, because one is for FY24 and the other one is for FY31, it seems to, in the note. I'm just having trouble.
The 31 was the nature centers.
So, we've had a lot of conversation about this during the budget process, and I think we've laid out some money. I will tell you what was in my mind, at least when we put this together, which is that the nature centers, both of them, were properties, and Jane, you're going to help me here a little bit, were acquired, or in some cases, I think even given to us. Both of them, I think, sit in the middle of resource protection areas. Okay, so there is some considerable challenges about how we would go about rebuilding them. As soon as we touch them, it becomes a real massive undertaking, and we might want to think about doing something different. Having said that, I know how beloved they are in the community, and I will just say, from my perspective, and I know Duke Banks and I have talked about this for many years, which is that the challenge of redoing them and doing them in a way that would really be faithful to what we want to do, to have them be the kind of experience we want, is an enormous undertaking. I know people say we should, just spiff them up a little bit. But that isn't the way we do it, and it's going to be a big deal. So I'll let Jane add to that.
Well, and Gulf Branch also is an historic building. So on top of that, that is not really ADA accessible currently. So there's just a lot of challenges with how they're sited and the buildings themselves. Department of Environmental Services does do a lot of upkeep to keep them going. They've replaced roofs, they've improved the AC, plumbing, other pieces, so that the buildings themselves are currently, for what they are, in good shape. They're just, what we're looking for is what's the future of nature centers. And I think just the timing of the CIP and other projects is why they were put out sort of an out year, to give us some time and space to do some thinking about planning And there's other sort of shorter term, more operational things that came out of the budget session that we had that we're going to be working on more sort of currently, which is like nature's current center hours and programming. So I think
Right.
that's why it's been put out in an out year, is just because there's some other priorities of things we need to look at.
Okay. Given all the complexity, so planning, actually executing would be really expensive and really difficult and really complicated, but planning might not cost so much and be so difficult, but you've really got to do that. So might it be possible to move up the planning some, at least thinking about it? Because it sounds like you're really thinking even about how are we going to do it, and I'm wondering if that could be moved up a little earlier than 31, not do, how difficult that would be to move up, because it sounds like, as I say, a lot of planning needs to be done. I'm not saying that we need to plunge in and build
I think the
them.
concern being, and I think we can get back to you though, is that sometimes when we do launch into planning work, there's an expectation from our community that then a project will come afterwards. And right now, so we could get a plan, and then it could, as the county managers are saying, it could be very expensive implementation and an undertaking that we maybe aren't ready to undertake. And I think that was also some of the concern, is that the planning money is out in a year when we think we can also then potentially think about what's the future. If we move it up, I don't know, we have to talk more. Is there an opportunity to do anything?
Yeah, so maybe, I guess what I might be thinking, just listening to all of it, is that possibly, it sounds like what we might want to be doing is thinking about what's a nature center of the future actually going to look like? So which would be a very different kind of question, and maybe that's something that could be done that's not so specifically to, plan these specific nature centers to get them whatever people are thinking that they might be spiffed up, but really to maybe just really rethink how we handle nature centers.
So that might be a conversation that we'd want to have, and also we may want to consider not just nature centers, but nature programming within the county, period.
Exactly.
So that it's not just grounded in a physical building, but also how do we approach nature programming? And that would be potentially a different type of study or conversation
Right.
that maybe DPR might undertake, not really a facility study that DS would do. So we can get back to you with some
If you would.
opportunities, but it may be a conversation to be had under the operating budget, maybe not something under the capital budget.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I just think that's some thinking that needs to be happening, and it's just kind of where we all are right now.
Right now is just, I think it was mentioned earlier, we are also updating the Forestry and Natural Resources Management Plan, and that while nature education and things are discussed in it, we're not specifically talking about the nature centers. I think as that process comes about, that will also give us an opportunity to have some conversations about sort of the nature education and opportunities in the county. And that first draft should be coming out coming out this summer. So that's also an area where we could have that conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, perhaps if we're going to have the holistic conversations, you'd include some thoughts about the Kiplinger Center, right, that the schools have out in, is it Fauquier County, I think, which actually kids love.
Right.
And you could have a holistic kind of way of having it all work. Okay, so that's a different sort of thing.
And we would want to bring in Nova Parks, who has the other nature center in the
Exactly.
county as well as a partner in that conversation.
Yeah. So I just encourage, I think it'd be great if we'd have that conversation. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to return to the Gateway Park conversation that you initiated earlier, and to ask if there are any plans to coordinate the scoping of what the project might look like in conjunction with the transportation efforts for Fort Myer Drive, considering their not only proximity, but feeding off of one another. Is there a way to think about timing the work on the transportation side to allow us to maybe front load some of the work that may be scheduled a little bit later for Gateway Park, and also to maybe conceive of combining some elements of the project so that we can leverage some funding that might be secured for transportation to augment the park work?
I would answer probably there's potential in all of that. I think that part of our work coming up here in the fall and going into next year will be to look at how all that coordination, what the opportunities are to certain synergies on project work, because you're correct in that, if there's some work on 4 Mile Drive that helps sculpt what we're moving into, we should take advantage of that. I think that, the planning down there has been, we have an indication of how that all should come together through the sector plan work that was done previously, and also some of the subsequent work that our colleagues in DES have done. And so I think we have a sense of where it is. I think the planning work in the fall here will allow us to dig into that a little bit more, to understand where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, not physically, but the process to which we're undertaking, and allow us to have those conversations and really look at what we can do to improve or to leverage both aspects of it.
Great, thank you. All right, before we wrap up, my last question, pickleball. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the proposal as laid out under emerging uses. So I think if I'm understanding the milestones correct, and I want to make sure I've got this correct because I know I'll be asked about it. So the idea is actually that we would, in 2023, both design the reconstruction of the existing courts for pickleball use at Walter Reed and actually do that reconstruction. So is it right that by the end of calendar 2023 or shortly into calendar 2024, there will be reconstructed pickleball courts at Walter Reed?
So the exact timeline of when they would open, I don't necessarily want to comment on that. I think the money is funded for 23, meaning that it would be available for us early next year once the bonds are sold. So we would begin our design work at that point. We would move from design right into the construction shortly thereafter. The design, that process, we will engage our users. I know people are very excited to talk to us about what pickleball should look like and how it will be. And so we still need to think through exactly if this is approved, how we're going to do that engagement, and so how long that will take. But there will be that aspect in that design work to engage the community and then move to the construction towards the latter part of 23. Because once we have design, we also have to go through permitting and things like that. Honestly, construction may actually start in 24 with this. So I think that I don't want to be overly aggressive, but I do think, with expectations to have conversations with everybody, we need to do that. And then we have to do the work to design it and bid it and permit it and all of that. So I just want to, this is a very good thing to get us there.
Yeah.
But there is a process I think people will expect and we'll have to move through to get there.
Absolutely.
So.
But the adoption of this CIP, or at least this recommendation, should be understood as a commitment to go through that process and ultimately reconstruct those courts as pickleball courts.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Garvey,
one quick question. It's just one other question on Quincy Park. I've been spending too much time with Diane Kresh because we're looking at probably redoing the library. I mean, they're all I'm assuming that there's going to be, just because the section on Quincy Park hardly mentions library, I'm assuming there might be some holistic planning with both any things that are done with the library and the park at the same time.
Absolutely. I think when we get into the Quincy Park, we can, when we define the scope of the master plan, we will know a little bit more at that point as well. Some of the thoughts from the library side and how we look at that site holistically, how we incorporate, how they relate to each other, and even synergistic uses of the park and the library as they relate to each other.
Thank you. I assumed that was going to be your answer, but I just thought I'd check. Thank you. And this is all great. I'm really pleased with all of the stuff, everything that's going on. Thank you. Lots of new parks.
Mr. Karantonis.
Quick clarification on the pickleball investment. So how much more capacity are we going, in terms of available fields, is that investment going to bring in Walter Reed? And is this the only place? So, pickleball is played across the county.
So in terms of actual capacity, we haven't designed it yet to know how many exact courts we're going to have there. So I can't say if we're going to have, it's going to be 2 more courts or however. The really key piece of what Walter Reed is that it's going to be a dedicated pickleball facility, meaning that those courts will not be used for tennis or basketball. And that is what the recommendation was coming out of the Public Spaces Master Plan, and that what has been the real call from people who play pickleball. There's sort of 2 things that they've really been interested in. One is having a dedicated facility, again, came out of that recommendation from the Public Spaces Master Plan, and 2, just increasing the number of opportunities to play, which is also looking at how we stripe other courts to have pickleball. So that too is something that we're looking at. We actually have an engagement that is out that's asking people about other locations in the county where we would stripe pickleball courts, both on tennis courts or on basketball courts. So the one part of the project, or one thing we will be doing, is this dedicated site at Walter Reed, but we also will be looking at adding lines at other locations in the county to increase the amount of pickleball play in the county overall.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Big thank you to our team, obviously quite a bit in the pipeline, and we appreciate you. Mr. McIntosh has been incredibly patient to brief us next on the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, so we'll do, for the last time, a changing of the guards today. Thank you again to DPR.
So next up, we was the Neighborhood Conservation Program, but now is our Arlington Neighborhoods Program come up, and Tim has also changed his name. He's no longer Tim McIntosh, he's Timothy McIntosh.
Oh, I see, excellent.
Yeah, because
Well,
of the whole program
Timothy.
name change.
Excellent. Thank you. And good afternoon. First off, I want to say on a personal note, I think it's really awesome to be here. This is the first time I've been in this room live. I've been coming into work in person, but it's really awesome to be back here. So thank you. I'm joined here today, virtually in the ether somewhere, by our Neighborhood Services Division Chief, Chikwe Njoku, and our budget analyst, Steve Bickel. So let's go ahead and get started. We are now the Arlington Neighborhoods Program. This is also pretty cool. And last week, the NCAC, no longer the NCAC, voted to change their committee name to the Arlington Neighborhoods Advisory Committee. So both of these were really an outgrowth of our, evaluation that we spent 2 years on. And as you know, it was finalized in 2021. So we're really excited to be moving along. A lot more to come as we continue to think about rebranding the program, but this is an important step in the right direction. So with that, our ask this year is really a balance between maintaining the existing programmatic functions while continuing to move through what we're titling our implementation framework, which basically addresses a lot of the recommendations that were in that final report. So we are hoping once we get through that over the next 18 to 24 months that when we come back and for this CIP 2 years from now, that we will seek a funding request that is commensurate with the updated mission and goals of the program. Next slide, please. So regarding racial equity, this is it's something we're obviously going to look at as we look at all components of the program. The implementation framework that we put together addresses 6 areas of our program, which includes neighborhood plans. It also includes projects, of course, the NCAC. So as we look to improving the program based on those recommendations, we will be using that equity lens and addressing those 5 racial and social equity questions and considerations. So it's something that we are committed to doing and something we'll do as we get through our framework. I do want to mention that in the short term, one of the things we are considering is a change to our point system, which is our guide to how we approve projects. We know that in the short term, I think we can include an equity component consideration. We're thinking about this. We want to do this sooner rather than later. So more to come on that. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about our completed projects in FY 2021. We had 6 of them, 1 park project and 5 street improvement projects. And I think it's always good to kind of reflect on the good work that we've done. So over the next couple slides, you'll see some good before and after pictures. Next slide, please. First one is our park project, which is Edison Park in the Arlington Forest neighborhood. This is just a really cool park that, as you can see on the left, was kind of a outdated playground, and we have upgraded it to more modern day equipment, working in conjunction with the Parks and Recreation Department. As you know, a quarter to a third of our portfolio are park projects, and Eric mentioned our partnership that we are going to have with Bailey's Branch Park in the future. Next slide. North Quintana Street, this is a classic sidewalk project that we do. You can see on the left, no sidewalk, street's in pretty bad shape. We incorporated a 5-foot sidewalk with the roadway redone, and then lots of utility work, which you can't see in this picture. But next slide, please. George Mason Drive. This is a little bit more atypical of a roadway than we would work on, but I think it's a great one to highlight because it's a good pedestrian safety upgrade. You can see there where on the left where there's no median, where we added one, it creates a nice pedestrian refuge in the middle there. Further along in the back, you'll see the updated median as well, and to date, trees have been planted in all of those areas as well. So it's in the next couple years, it's gonna look really good when the trees start to mature. Next slide, please. So just talking about our active projects. These are projects that are approved by you all. They're all county board approved projects. They're in some phase of design or construction. Up on the left there, you'll see that we have about 6 or 7 that are actively in construction. Most of them are complete. I do want to highlight one on North Larimore Street, which is just an awesome, beautiful intersection project that we partnered with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management and created a really, really nice rain garden. If you're out and about sometime and get a chance to take a look at it, it's at 9th and Larimore. And I want to give a shout out to Brian Hannigan. I think some of you may or may not know that a few weeks ago he passed away. He was the president of the Dominion Hills Association for many, many years. And he advocated for a long time for this project. And he never saw it completed, but maybe we'll have an opportunity to do something to dedicate this to him. I just think it's a really cool project, and he did a lot of work to help us get it through. Let's see, down in active, we'll go to the right side up top. These are projects that are probably the most recently approved by you all, and so they're in kind of an earlier phase of design, and the ones below that are a little more further along. These are ones that we anticipate we're going to be constructing later this year and moving into next year, probably about half this year and the other half next year. Next slide, please. So here's our program funding summary. There's a total in the 10-year CIP of $85.2 million. 80 million of that is bond money. 5.2 of that is PAYGO money over the next 10 years. So breaking down and parsing out a little bit, that 80 million, 64 of that would be new bond funding, and 16 million of that is previously approved bonds. So these are projects that we have essentially in our portfolio now that are county board approved projects. Next slide. So just to break out even more, the $16 million of these previously approved projects, we have 2 categories here. One is unallocated and one is active. The one on the right are active projects. Again, those are projects that you all have approved and that we're working on in design and getting to construction. And that breaks down even further to the cash we have on hand, which is $3 million. That will pay for our upcoming construction projects. The unissued money is $7 million. That is bond money that will be sold once we're ready to construct those projects that are going to be done probably next year. The unallocated money consists of the 2021 bond, which is $2 million. And on the left at the bottom, we have $4 million in savings, which is pretty nice. And it's mostly a result of us not having to go out to bid and using an on-call contractor. We save a lot more money when we can use an on-call contractor. We always do our cost estimating with bid prices just to protect ourselves, and because we can never anticipate whether or not we will or won't have to go out to bid. So it was nice to have that extra savings, and those will be reprogrammed and reallocated into future projects. The 2021 bond money, the Arlington Neighborhoods Advisory Committee, it doesn't roll off the tongue yet, but it will. They approved 2 new projects last month at our funding round, last week for about $1.2 million. So we're spending a good chunk of that 2021 bond already. Next slide, please. And you will see those in the fall, likely. This is our program summary. I kind of went over most of the numbers, so I won't go over all of these numbers here. I'll just highlight that you'll see the FY23 and FY24 numbers, which are $2 million each year. And the new bond issue, as you see, is $64 million. That plus the 16.2 of the previously approved funding is where we get that total of 85.2 that I highlighted earlier. Next slide, please. How are we going to spend the money? It's always a question people ask. So over the next essentially 4 fiscal years, we'll be spending, we do seem to construct about 5 to 7 projects every year. So our plan is to essentially spend that $16.2 million over the course of the next 4 fiscal years. And starting next year, we'll probably do another 4 to 5 projects. And next slide, please. Oh, I think we had one more, but yeah, it was. Oh, there we go. It's there. So really, in summary, our goal is to just continue to fund a mix of projects with our remaining bond balances. Again, looking at that potential to incorporate that equity component or category into our points system. And also, we'll need to balance the need for staff to continue to work on and make progress on the implementation framework while maintaining the existing programmatic functions. So that's it, quick and dirty, and happy to answer any questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McIntosh. Appreciate that. We'll start with Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh, and thank you to the committee for doing such a great work. And
thank you.
So my question is twofold, but there are 2 related pieces. So you have already started to do this equity lens evaluation of the program and how it delivers. My question is, so there is a pipeline already under the current, or let's call it the old regime, without the equity evaluation. Would it be useful to shift some money in the fiscal year 23-24 to add, for example, $1 million on each, and dedicate that or use that to leverage more equity-centered program deliverables, so that we get we get to steer the program towards the more equity-weighted decision-making that we want to have sooner rather than later.
Right. I think, well, just to clarify, we have started. I wouldn't say we've made a lot of progress on this equity component and category. It's a little trickier with us because, the projects come from the ground up. So we're having to balance how we fund projects based on what neighborhoods would like to do and obviously what the county would like to do. But to answer your question, yes, I think so. I think it would help us probably target some of those neighborhoods that maybe don't necessarily have projects. I think it could encourage them to include projects while also not undermining the projects in our pipeline that have been there for a while as well, because we want to be respectful to those neighborhoods that have been waiting quite some time for projects that we have. So I think we can strike a balance there. Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of this idea of reforming the program with a little extra money so that this reform is accelerated. Thank you for that. I will circle back offline.
Sure. Thank you.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I'll just follow. I think the equity, getting that into the program is really good, because I think their neighborhoods, there may be a lot of renters, a lot of people who are too busy and they get, they get less. They already have less, and they get less because they don't have the wherewithal sometimes to do the typical Arlington way. So I'm glad we're doing that. And I'll be interested in sort of the checklist. I mean, sometimes you can go into a neighborhood and you can tell whether this is a wealthy neighborhood or not by like the amount of trees they have, or, there's some really basic things that hopefully will kind of come out with the checklist, and we can start to rebalance some of those inequities. And I appreciate you working on that, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just say, as we consider the possibility, the figment of our imagination that there might be savings, this is, to align myself with Mr. Karantonis, it's an area I'm interested in, but I've discovered in conversation with, in the work that you've done, that I need to really understand the details of implementation. And I appreciated that last slide because lest, I'm searingly aware of the amount 3 or 4 years ago that that advocates said should be in the program based on the increased costs. But I also want to be programmatically at least rigorous enough to understand. But I want to put enough of a point on, if there are savings, we've heard other items that I would have to understand better, but this is an area where I'm at least interested, the equity component and moving that at this stage. I'm mindful that we had 2 million last year and 6 million proposed this year, so I don't want to be overzealous, but I do want to make enough of a specifics that this is to signal to you and perhaps Mr. Karantonis and all of us that this is an area where I'm wondering if we can do a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I do want to note that as staff, we're also cognizant of the fact that we can't do it all. Our committee, and right now we have a really good executive committee that changed over and started at the beginning of the year. All 3 of them are committed to working on this with us, and they all really understand the importance of incorporating equity into everything we do. So it's not just projects. We want to consider how we make NC plans a little more accessible and equitable for neighborhoods. We know that these are done by volunteers, so they're not easy to do, and so how can we make them a little easier for some of those neighborhoods that don't have the bandwidth as some of the others? So I'm looking forward to working with them as well, because they're a big part of what we do, and they've been partners with us for a long time. Yeah.
A question. One of the, I think, historic pressures on the program has been this sort of sense that it's the only game in town to get some kind of neighborhood core services things addressed. And I was really encouraged to hear, as part of our transportation session last week, that there's proposed in the CIP almost $12 million for new sidewalk and curb maintenance programs. I think it was described as a tripping hazard blitz, which I love that wartime analogy of declaring war on tripping hazards. I wonder to what extent you're seeing that, or kind of other emerging work in perhaps Vision Zero, as an opportunity to kind of, direct some of the pressure that has historically been on the neighborhoods program to deliver that, particular multimodal infrastructure towards another program or another funding stream? Or is that distinct enough from what the neighborhoods program has always done that it's hard to imagine that actually making a dent in the type of demand for these dollars?
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, thank you for the question. I think it can make a dent. It's tricky because I think you all know, at least have a good idea of how our process works. We have a petitioning effort, right? And so we might determine as we're going through this framework that there are just some projects that may not be appropriate for the NC program and probably should be funneled through another program. It makes me disappointed to know that an important sidewalk project doesn't pass our petitioning effort, and we don't like when that happens. So we want to work with the other programs in the county. This is Vision Zero, Neighborhood Complete Streets, to the extent we can, to partner with them on determining, hey, which projects might be appropriate for you all, which ones might be better suited for us. That's a discussion we'll have to have with them and with the staff, but we're keenly aware that it's something we need to figure out so that we can, neighborhoods can have options to do different types of projects. I think there's a role for all of us to play, and I think we can partner and make it happen. And hopefully we can figure some of that out during our framework.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to pick up on where this conversation all is, I'm just wondering, Mr. McIntosh, if there is a way to sort of develop a compendium of formerly neighborhood conservation best practices in terms of projects that have been funded, so that we can maybe get at the equity angle a little bit differently, appreciating that we've sought to find opportunities to fund things through other vehicles. But, for circumstances where neighborhoods may not necessarily be aware of what's possible, aware of what's done, and not knowing that it might be applicable to their particular community. Is there a way we can be proactive in advertising? What are some of the things that we have learned over the many years are good for neighborhoods? And, for example, if your neighborhood doesn't have it, we set up an additional pipeline as a way to deliver those kinds of best practice initiatives and infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey, for the question. I would say absolutely. I think we can do that for sure. As you know, each neighborhood is different, and so some projects may be better suited in some neighborhoods than others. So I think first we have to look at what type of neighborhood we're talking about. And once we look at that, we can also assess what those needs are. Some neighborhoods don't necessarily need sidewalks. There are a lot of neighborhoods that have their sidewalks in place. So they might have a different type of project that they need to look at. And so I think what you're saying makes sense, and I think it's something we can do. And there's no reason why we can't find appropriate projects for different types of neighborhoods throughout the county. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, on that note, thank you. It's exciting to see the evolution of the program, and the name is perhaps the most recognizable change, but by far not the only one. So I find it especially exciting to be able to look at a proposal to fund this program more generously and with further bonds as a way of implementing all of that really difficult work that you all have undertaken. So we appreciate you very much.
Thank you. It is an exciting time to be a part of the program when you're re-envisioning how and what we might become. It's pretty neat. So thank you.
Fabulous. Excellent. All right, Mr. Manager, I believe that concludes our session today. We thank you. We will be back soon to talk about a couple of remaining areas of our CIP, but most imminently we'll see everyone back in this room.
Right, we have, our next CIP work session is in 2 weeks. We also have the public hearing coming up during that week also.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, and we will see everybody most imminently on Saturday for our regular meeting of the board. Till then, we are adjourned. Thank you.